Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of my podcast, A Very Merry Commentary. Today, I have on castmate and longtime friend Ronnie Stevenson, who I had on last episode as we talked about our experience with the Real Housewives of Vancouver. But today, we have Ronnie's back, and she's going to share with us a very personal story, which, as many of you know, is about her son, Houston, who tragically passed away a couple of years ago. And she has not really spoken publicly about this or shared her story. So today, she's going to share it with us. So she's got with her her good friend, Jim Skinner, who happens to be a counselor. And Jim and she will be talking about grief, how to deal with grief, and how Ronnie has managed to deal with this tragic loss of Houston. So without further ado, here's Ronnie and Jim. All right. So, welcome everybody to another edition of the podcast. And I'm so happy to have Ronnie back. And today, Ronnie is joined by her good friend, Jim Skinner. And I'm so welcome, Jim. So lovely to meet you.
Yeah,
I've heard so many wonderful things about you.
wonderful to meet you as well.
Jim, can you let us know? You're an Adlerian counselor.
Adlerian, yes. So, who's Adler is what people ask. Adler and Freud were buddies, and they both started modern psychology. Was created by those two gentlemen, both in Vienna, 1908. Around then, they became closer buddies, and by 1924, they went two different directions. Freud said you want to use his language or his accent anyways, you want to kill your father to sleep with your mother. And you want to kill your mother to sleep with the father. Adler said that's really nutty. No one does that. No, that isn't the case. And he had a whole other explanation. Adler was very much concerned with women's rights. He's very much concerned with equality. He really believed that we're social beings and we strive to belong. We want to be healthy. We need to feel part of and unique within a community.
So I know that you've been working with Ronnie, and you're also a transcendental
Yeah,
meditation therapist as well,
teacher, yes.
teacher.
Yes, I've been doing that since 1970. A teacher. I started meditating when I was 18 in 1964, when it was very weird to be meditating and doing yoga. It was very weird. Anyways, yes, and over the years I've taught many people to
And
meditate.
and what does that mean, Jim? Transcendental, like
It means to transcend, means to go beyond the ordinary thinking to a much deeper place of what we'd call a state of being. The unified field is how physics would talk about it. It would be nirvana, samadhi in that language, or as Christ would say, the kingdom of heaven within. And so
oh,
many people say, oh, yes, the kingdom of heaven within, but where is that within? So the thing that the people in the Vedic tradition discovered was how to get there easily. And it's been 2,800 years since anybody's been practicing this form of transcendental meditation. At the UN, when they signed the International Meditation Day on December, winter solstice, I should say, just this year, the leader of the Transcendental Meditation Movement, he gave the first inaugural address at the UN. So it's a very scientifically verifiable approach to meditation, and it's very deep and simple. I've taught people with Down syndrome. I taught my
wow.
grandmother at 91. So anyone who can think can do it, regardless of your belief, non-beliefs, it works.
And you know, I know that this is a special like time for Ronnie to because she doesn't
Yes,
really, as far as talking about grief and what
yes,
she's gone through with Houston's passing. And before we get
yes.
to Ronnie talking about that, is your working with Ronnie, is what you do, is that something that helps in the process of grief? Because I know from being in psychology, going to school and studying psychology, the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and the 7 stages of grief and all of
Yes.
those things. But this is something different where it sounds like you have to go within yourself to really try to find that power.
Well, the thing is that there's two levels of life, the level of change and the level of non-change. And the purpose of meditation is to take you to that place of non-change and to, through the practice of meditation over time, make it a perfect, sort of a permanent state within you. So you can live in the world of change and also have the experience of non-change at the same time, which gives you and that state of non-change, by the way, is a state of bliss, a state of love, a state of harmony. So you have that supporting you in the process of change. And through the process of living, everything that begins ends. Everything that's born dies. So dealing with grief or anything that becomes a lot clearer to you what that's about when you have
Yeah,
the
because it's so hard to navigate grief. Ronnie, how do you feel that Jim has helped you, and in what way has that helped to transcend your grief? Because I know you've gone through many stages of it, and I'm sure will continue to, but you've been so courageous through all of it.
Okay, well, I've tried to meditate, and I know a lot of people say they meditate, and I've never really been able to get to a place that is, where people say they are in deep meditation. And I remember, and this was actually before we lost Houston, before Houston left us. My husband Russell and was it
Charlie.
Charlie and Russell and I all went to see Jim. And I don't know what you did to me, but he lit incense. I think you were speaking in another language. Sanskrit. And he took me to a place within minutes where I was completely transcended to a state of, I was completely relaxed, and I went into a place that was so beautiful. And I remember being it was sunny, there were fields of flowers, and there was a body of water in front of me. And do you know when you see water and the sun is shining on it, and it's almost like
Yeah, sparkles.
sparkles?
Stars.
And there were
Yeah.
stars and sparkles all over the water, and it was so absolutely beautiful. And it was a place that I just felt, it was harmonious, it was beautiful, it was peace. It was a place I had never been. And funny enough, after we lost Houston, we were in Africa, and we went to this place where these African women were actually, they walked for miles, and they had these, buckets of water on their heads and crazy. And I looked at this bank with all these wildflowers, and the water had the sparkles, and I said, this is the place Jim took me to. And it was so strange because I felt I was right back in that place.
Wow.
It was so crazy. It was unbelievable.
I didn't know the story.
But I have not done a lot of transcendental meditation with Jim. I've done a lot of work with Jim,
Therapeutic work,
therapeutic work,
Yeah.
and a lot of talking. And Jim has worked with our entire family. He works with complex grief. So we started working with Jim. I think that therapy is a phenomenal thing for anybody, and I encourage it. So we started working with Jim, and then Russell started working with Jim, and then Charlie started working with Jim, and then Jordan started working
Wow.
with Jim, and Houston.
Yes, Houston did.
So Houston was working with Jim, and so Jim's known our entire family, which is.
Yes, and it sort of evolved just the way you've described it. Yes, one-on-one,
Well,
the whole crew.
so the whole family really worked with you for a while. I mean, like, yeah, therapy is so great for anybody at any time, but I know that specifically, from a personal experience, my mother passed away suddenly 4 years ago, and um, I had a really rough time getting through that, and I didn't go through therapy. And I remember that everyone I ran into, all I would do is talk, how are you? Not good. My mom died. I must have said that for 2 years straight, to the point where people were like, well, it's been 2 years. Maybe you have some things going on besides the fact that your mother died. So
What
I was
happens
stuck.
is every time somebody says, how are you? You say not doing well. And then you start to create a small little pathway, then you repeat it again, not doing well. It turns into a larger pathway. Pretty soon it's a road. And by the 50th person who said, how are you doing? You say, not well. It's a highway. And so you have to, at some point, when they say not well, you have to say, I am going shopping this afternoon. I am going to put flowers on the grave and feel better. I'm going to, as Ronnie has done, I'm going to start a foundation for my son, Houston. You have to change the
Right.
course. Otherwise, the neurology of it, you just travel down that,
It's almost like you're
pathway.
manifesting it to get worse, right? You're just complete,
Yes.
like, yeah, you're never getting out of the mud puddle.
You never, well, you get into a groove. It's like, yes, it just becomes
Yeah.
a neurological groove. It's actually measurable, that groove.
And grief is so hard. And I mean, Ronnie, I know that, I mean, I want you to feel free to, and I really want you to share your story because I know a lot of people, particularly with what happened with Houston, don't know exactly what happened. And there's a lot of speculation out there. And of course, um, it doesn't even really matter how things happen, just more to me that it did happen. And as I've said before, Jim, and you probably know this too, like there is no losing a parent. I just lost my brother. I mean, I can lose people lose people in life that you dearly love, and it's hard,
Yeah.
but no one should have to go through the loss of a child.
No,
And
that is the toughest one of all. It,
yeah, like
it is
I
the
can't even
toughest.
imagine.
Yes, agreed. It leads to what we're just talking about. Ronnie mentioned the word complex grief. So then it becomes a whole other matter than just, for example, I was just telling Ronnie that last night my ex-mother-in-law passed away at 98. We were expecting her to pass away. She's passed away, and we were all just sharing stories of it on the internet last night and this morning. And it's expected. It's very different than the sudden loss of a child, and particularly, well, any child, but particularly through suicide becomes especially challenging because there's the what if I had done this? I want if that. So a whole bunch of maybe I could have done this. I should have noticed that. The should haves and the what ifs start to pile up and go round and round, perseverating in your head. And that's part of it. The other part of it is that complex grief doesn't end with, no grief ends with a particular timeline. You carry that with you, your life. But what you do is you start to build a life around it. With complex grief, it's much harder to start building that life, going through the stages of grief, and then coming to that sixth stage, which is the stage of making meaning out of your life, creating a more meaningful life out of this. You don't lose that grief, but you start to create a meaningful life to help fill that gap, that void, to start making your life be meaningful and joyful again. And Ronnie, bless her, has done a pretty good job of work on that. But with complex grief, it might take 5-6 years for you to start to feel really you're entering back into the human race in the full sense.
And as a parent, I find like, and I'm sure you'll all agree, it's like there's only so much we can do until they're out in, they turn 13, 14 years old. From the time they're born to the time they're 13 or 14, you have complete, pretty much control. And then all of a sudden, the environment starts playing a role. The other kids start playing a role, the pressures of society. Now we've got the internet, what the kids have to deal with now. It's just, I mean, when I was young, I didn't really hear much about suicide. You really didn't. It was very unusual, but now it's the pressure that's put on kids, and it's not anything to really do with their home life so much. It's just all the extra pressure that is built into, it's put on them.
100%. I have been doing parenting classes for 52 years and parenting teams, and I meet with parents of teenagers weekly. And what you're describing is exactly right on. And it's hard to put your kid behind the wheel of the car. When they're little, they're in the back seat and you're driving them to school and you're
Yeah.
driving them to sports. But when they reach adolescence, now they're behind the wheel of the car and you're beside them as kind of the driving instructor. And you might say, well, if you want to go to that cafe, you're going to have to get over to the right-hand lane in the next 3 lights if you want to get there. So we can help them that way, but we can't direct them in the same way. So it becomes much more challenging to be a parent with all the pressures you've just described on the kids, and especially on girls, I want to say.
And before we started filming with you today, Mary, Jim and I were talking about Houston, and you know, Houston was not suicidal. He was not a suicidal person, and he was never in a single mental health facility. You know, sometimes you see people that attempt suicide and they've done it several times, or they're in and out of different facilities to get help, but Houston never was. And as a
No.
matter of fact, I felt like Houston was probably one of the most put together, most beautiful human beings I've ever known. And he was depressed. I get depressed. And you know, they say depression is a form of mental illness. Well, gosh, there must be a lot of mentally ill people running around out there, because who hasn't been depressed at
Yes.
one time or another?
Yes.
So when people talk about mental illness, I say Houston was not mentally ill, but if you say the word depression, that is a form of it. So Houston was depressed, and Houston had an alcohol problem,
Yes.
and he had just gone away to get help for his drinking. And the night we lost Houston, and Jim and I were talking about this just before, Houston did not want to die. And Houston, I'm telling you, if he woke up the next morning, Houston would have said, I dodged a bullet. Houston had a moment of depression and alcohol, and in a single horrific
Impulse.
an impulsivity cost him his life. But Houston didn't want to die. He was not a suicidal person. He was not in and out of mental, and that in itself is what is so scary, is that there were not signs of Houston saying, you know, hey, look, you guys, I'm feeling like I want to, you know, kill myself, or I'm suicidal. Houston said a few times, like, God, sometimes I feel like I just want to die. But you know, I remember
I've heard so many people say
Yeah,
that.
a lot of people say that.
a
Yeah,
lot of
exactly.
people say that. At that moment, he felt like everything was wrong, and he felt like he could just die. But I don't think Houston wanted to die. I really do not believe Houston wanted to die.
In my conversations with him, I never got that. And I've talked to people who I've been worried about and talked to them, had their parents on suicide watch, all this sort of thing. That never occurred to me with Houston. And that's
Never.
true.
That's
He
why
would phone me in the middle of the night and we'd talk at 2 a.m. He'd
Yeah.
wake me up, well, it's Houston. And we'd have a conversation, usually when he was drinking. And we'd talk for a bit. And he'd be upset about this or that, something to do with his career or something like that would be on his mind. But beyond that, it never came up as, Jim, I want to take my life.
No, never.
It never came up.
That's why it
That's
was
what's
so
so-
shocking.
And that's what makes it so, it's not understandable, which makes it complex grief, because we don't fully understand how in the heck he
What
got
happened
there.
in that moment?
And so
Yeah.
I'm sure, I was gonna say that you must have gone through in your mind so many times, what happened that day, what happened the day before that, like, is there anything that could have happened that you would just go, oh, maybe that's what it is, that
It
caused.
was, I've gone through it over and over and over and over, every day since July 4th, 2022. As to how did I miss this? And like Jim said, you're forever searching for the answers, or should I have not traveled? I was in Boston, and then we were in Martha's Vineyard. Had I not gone away, how did this happen? And you're always
Doing the what
searching.
ifs, yeah.
I also wanted to talk about Houston's death, and we did do a family segment, and you are the very first podcast and the very first person I have opened up to. A lot of people asked me after Houston decided to travel on ahead, if they could interview me, and there are loads of people who have asked me to do interviews, and I had declined all of them because I was not ready for it, and I
Yeah.
couldn't open up. And so you're the first person I felt comfortable in doing this with. But we did do a family segment on Houston's website, and it was called How We See It as a Family. As a matter of fact, Houston did not hang himself, and I want to get that out there because in my mind, I find that a gruesome thought. I don't like to think that. And, you know, when I first found out, you know, in my mind, I didn't know. I did not know how it happened. All I know is he's not with us.
Yeah.
Okay, so Houston basically could have, he was not suspended in air and he was not hanging. Houston basically was asphyxiated because he put his neck in a belt on his pull-up bar in his theater room. And they, you know, those bars that you do pull-ups?
Yeah.
So he put a belt around it and he just put his neck in it. And because Houston was so inebriated, and that is why on Houston's Instagram page, I talk about alcohol a lot, because had Houston not been as inebriated as he was that night, Houston could have helped himself. But the paramedics said he would have passed out. And because Houston passed out, his feet were on the ground. So this is what I'm saying. Houston could have stood up. He could have easily stood up. He just put his weight down and he passed out. And I believe he passed out because he was very inebriated. And part of Houston's depression was because it was COVID, and that we had just come out of COVID. And we are just coming out of COVID, and you know, the whole world was put on hold.
Yeah.
And acting, the acting industry is tough. He was actually one of the only people filming a movie in the United States during COVID.
Yeah.
It was the very last movie he ever filmed, and they were the only film going during COVID.
That's right.
Wow.
True. But Houston was getting depressed because you're locked up and you're sitting at home, and a lot of people, a lot of mental health really started to arise in people when you're locked up and you're confined and you can't practice your
Well, a lot
craft
of people, it was traumatizing. They have PTSD, a form of PTSD.
from it.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Yes.
So it's so complex, Mary, because we did not see this coming. And Houston was so put together and loved life, and he had so much going for him. And you know, Houston and I have 4 children, and I always tell everybody, it doesn't matter if you have 10 children or 2 children, you love all of your children the same.
Yes.
We love our children the same, but
and kids never understand that we love them more than they could ever love us.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
our relationships with every individual on the planet, whether it's your child or your best friend or your mother or a colleague or whoever it is, relationships are different with every person. So I love all of my children the same, but my relationship with Houston was exceptionally close.
Yes.
It was undeniably, we were just pretty much 2 peas in a pod. I mean,
like soulmates almost.
Yeah, I always said he was
Yeah.
my twin flame. It doesn't mean that I loved him more, but we were most alike and we spent a lot of time together. So losing Houston has been just paramount. It's huge, and it's something I struggle with every single day. And some days I have a handle on it, and today I'm talking about it without breaking down.
Yeah.
You know, some days I can talk about it, and some days I just think of him and I start bawling my eyes out, you know. So it's, grief is not linear.
No, and it's something, it's good to talk about it.
Yeah.
It really is important too.
Well, I also feel I have kind of desensitized myself because I have talked about Houston so much, and I have videos of Houston playing in my house, and I hear his voice and I see his photos, where my older son, Jordan, he can barely look at a photo of Houston or watch a video because he can't take that kind of pain. So that if Houston or Jordan starts talking about Houston, he gets very emotional. for me, and when I say desensitized, it's because I talk about Houston all the time. I'm very outward. I'm an outward person. It,
Mhm.
I want to talk about
I
this.
see.
And Mary, you said earlier that nobody really did talk about suicide, and it was something we didn't hear about so often. We never heard about suicide either. Suicide was not a part of our vocabulary. A friend of Russell's, a business associate, his daughter had died by suicide a few years before Houston, and Houston was working on her foundation. And Houston was starting a podcast or whatever it was with his friend Dana Lind, and it was called Projecting Positive, and it was about mental health. And he started researching suicide and stuff. And sometimes they call it that
You told me about
domino
this.
effect.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he was
And-
he
Yeah.
was helping other people or something?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah, he was
Yeah.
helping other people, and he was working on the foundation of a business associate of ours whose daughter had died by suicide. So, we had never really heard of suicide either, and it wasn't a part of anything that, you've heard of it,
yeah,
but it wasn't
Yeah.
part of our vocabulary. And
right.
that's why everything surrounding Houston's passing is so surreal, and you're left searching for the missing pieces and the fragments of how did this happen, and how did this happen to such a put together amazing
And
human
we
being?
may never understand,
No,
but we can come to a place of meaning. Make it meaningful to us. And
It's interesting because my brother who passed away recently, he struggled his whole life with the drug addiction. It was a terrible life that my brother led. And we all tried so hard to get my brother jobs to make his life happy. Nothing could stop his addiction. It didn't matter what we did. And so we constantly were afraid of him killing himself because when he would get to the bottom where he'd be put in jail, like so many things happen.
Yeah.
And or he'd be strung out somewhere and the amount of, I guess, sheer luck that he had that he hadn't gone much earlier than he did is insurmountable. But the truth is, we always thought he was a candidate for suicide because his life was so, it was so
Yeah.
horrible in many, many ways. Like it just was not a life that he could ever have led. That never had a girlfriend, never got married, never had children, didn't have a home of his own. He was constantly, living at my parents, in and out of jail. Like it was bad. So, but he never did that. And we always thought he would. So then you take somebody like Houston, who had everything going for him that from the outward
Yes.
perspective, I guess. And something that as a parent, you would never think, oh, Houston's so depressed. We have to be very careful. He might do something to himself. This is where it gets really confusing, doesn't it? Because you just kind of go, what
Yeah.
can you do as a parent to know that? I mean, to see the signs, or if there are signs. And then in Houston's case, there were no signs. Depression is depression. Like you said, Ronnie, we all get depressed. We all don't want to get out of bed sometimes. And, you know,
Yeah.
but in this case, how would you know? Like, what does a person
You
do?
wouldn't. I mean, he talked to me quite regularly and very openly, and there weren't the signs, there weren't the red flags that
Yeah.
would tell me that he is suicidal.
That's why it's
They just weren't there, Mary.
I
That's
chalk-
why
I
it's
chalk it-
confusing to me why it happened.
I chalk it down to a moment. It was a moment, and he was inebriated and depressed, and there were some things that went down that night, and he was getting a little bit more depressed. And I remember on July 1st, I said, do you want to come to this July 1st party with us? And he said, no, it's okay, I'll stay home. And but I think he felt sometimes alone and lonely, and I get lonely all the time. I feel like I always tell my mom, I'm always so lonely.
Houston felt loved.
Mhm.
There's no question about that. But the other side of it is back to Alfred Adler. Not only do we feel that we are loved, but we need to feel that we are part of the community. And the first community we belong to is our family. Because he wanted to be the best at whatever he was doing. That was the thing that's acting. He just wanted to be better than anyone out there. He strove very hard in all that he did. He put his heart and soul into it. And at times he judged himself very harshly with that. And so I'm not good enough to belong in this wonderful family that loves me.
That's so strange because I don't understand that or
Wow.
see that or even.
Yeah.
understand.
I understand. So let me just say
Yeah.
more about that.
Yeah.
I've come up with a term called indivisible, that we're both need to feel unique and part of at the same time.
Mhm.
That a very healthy person who has that social feeling of belonging and connection and is also seen as a unique person. And I've never said that
Wow.
before. And I'm saying it here because it's important for the people who are seeing your podcast to know that that's very, very important piece of this whole topic of what we're talking about.
Wow, that's really interesting.
But wherever you are, I know in Canada, about 50% of teenage girls are mentally ill, diagnosably at any time.
Wow.
It's that hot.
Wow.
It's that hot. And so the part of the reason is the struggle to be part of community. The thing about the phone is it isolates us. It creates dopamine, but it doesn't create serotonin. It doesn't create a sense of contentment and feeling I am seen uniquely and part of that feeling of indivisibility that is so central to our well-being. And the loss of community, it hurts me deeply because I see it everywhere, every day in people's lives.
It is a different world, isn't it, than what we all grew up in. This whole social media and this I was reading this morning about this ban on TikTok and how if TikTok does go off, or they stop TikTok or take it away, that maybe the kids will go outside and see the sunshine. Or,
Right.
maybe they'll notice there's something else in life other than
Yeah.
being, like this. And it's just a different world, isn't it? And then
It
they
sure
see
is.
things like we'd have to look at magazines, flip through magazines, and that was hard enough to think this is what I should look like, or this is
Exactly.
the standard. And now it's just, I don't know how young girls do it. I know, Ronnie, you've got two daughters. I don't have a daughter, so I'm kind of
Yeah.
like, wow.
I bought two of my grandchildren telescopes because I wanted them not looking at their phone, but looking at the stars. I
Oh,
wanted them to have a bigger
Oh.
picture of life.
That's nice.
yeah,
That was
that's a
that was
beautiful
something I did
metaphor.
for
Yeah,
them, yeah.
Nice.
yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely a different world and I think about it all the time. I mean, Mary, did you ever think you'd be saying our generation were the good old days? I'm now saying,
Isn't that
hey,
crazy?
my generation, I say to my kids,
Yeah.
I'm Gen X and
Yes.
Gen X, we're like the tough survivors,
Yeah.
You think about all the things we did and we played outside and we climbed
Came
trees,
home when the
rode
street
bikes.
lights were on. My
That's
mom
right.
used to say, come home
Yeah.
when the street lights were on. We didn't have, I was gone.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
I do think that social media is a huge problem.
It's isolating.
Yeah, and predominantly, I
Yeah.
think for the younger generation of the teenagers and teenage girls, it's actually sometimes kind of ugly, but
It
right,
is.
yeah,
Oh, it can be brutal
Yeah.
because you post something online about me and your 50 followers who each have 50 followers all see it, and suddenly that's a huge burden.
yeah, and I think that and this is not in Houston's case, but in a lot of younger people that I will say that Charlie's she has a girlfriend and their family just lost their 14-year-old daughter
Oh,
in
Lord.
West Vancouver last week. So she died by suicide and she was 14 years old. And I hate to say this, but I feel like these children and these people that push some other child to the brink of death
Yes.
need to be held accountable somehow.
Agree.
It's you don't get away with that. you know,
You know
sometimes,
the story of Amanda Todd, remember? I think Amanda Todd
Yes.
was one of those first kind of internet,
yes,
and I
yes.
think that guy was brought to justice, and he's been put away for a long time, but you can't bring her back. You know, that's the
Oh, it's also happens to males. One young man in West Vancouver had to move to England because of things that were said about him online that were just furthest thing from the truth. And I know a man who's now 33, and he phoned me last night. He used the word, "I think I'm going to take my life," and I spent some time with him last night on the phone. Ironically, after talking about my mother-in-law with online, and not talking, but online, sharing pictures about my ex-mother-in-law online, and then this gentleman phoned me, and because of things that were being said about him online.
Oh, wow.
And so he's an
Yeah.
adult male, and it's the impression of things. So all of that puts pressure on people in so many ways today that wasn't there for you, and definitely wasn't there for me. The other part about that is the community. When I grew up, I grew up on a farm in Richmond. It was a farming community largely, but I knew the story of everybody within 2 or 3 miles radius of my house.
yeah, the small
They,
town, the
they
small
knew
town.
me, I knew
Yeah.
them. When I had my going to the Richmond Rod and Gun Club, and I had my across the handlebars of my 3-speed bike, I had my 22
Yeah.
Huey 75 shotgun, not shotgun, but 22 across the handlebars. I'd ride from number 1 road up to number 8 road to go to the Rod and Gun Club, and no one stopped me. No police surrounded me in tactical
The
gear.
good old days.
The good old
I'm just
days,
saying the good
yeah.
old days are gone.
Yeah,
All the
they are.
point I'm trying to make is the good old days had a sense of community.
Yeah.
But you know, both Ronnie and I have dealt with some of this online harassment. I know I certainly have, and
Yeah.
it's horrible. It's so degrading, and it's so, even if you try not to let it, you know, we're adults and we should be able to handle this stuff, but during the show and after the show, I mean, people would say like the cruelest, meanest things, like, you know, about your looks, about who you are, about like things you did, or, you know, dig
Yeah.
up dirt. It's just, you kind of go like, are you kidding me? Like, this is what kids have to deal with. And
Right.
it's hard enough for us to deal with it.
And an adolescent who's got the emotional brain of an adult, but the prefrontal cortex of a child. So their emotions are very large and not regulated because they don't have the prefrontal cortex self-regulation of an
Yeah.
adult, or the brain of the emotional brain of a child, so that it can self-regulate. That teenager is far more dysregulated, shall we say, because of the way, just developmentally, neurologically, they move from adolescence into adulthood. And that adulthood doesn't really end for girls until they're about 24, and boys around 25, 26.
Listening to a podcast last night with Mel Robbins and
Oh, I
Oprah,
love her.
and speaking about social media, I just she kind of came up with this whole thing called "let them."
Right.
Let them, because
Yeah.
her son was going to prom, and the son didn't know he was going to go to prom until 48 hours before prom. And at the last minute, he said, "Yeah, I think I'll go." So they're out in the middle of Vermont or wherever, and she's scrambling to find a tux and shoes and corsage for the girlfriend. And, you know, the day of
Yeah.
the prom, it is a torrential downpour. It's raining, and she's like freaking out and trying to figure it all out, and they're all getting wet, and she's trying to control everything. And she's like, "Oh my God, you know, everyone's hair is getting, and their shoes are getting dirty." And her daughter, Kendall,
Yeah.
pulls her aside and she goes, "Mom, knock it off. You're being crazy." She said, let them get wet. Let them just be outside. Let them get their shoes dirty. And
Yeah.
the girl didn't want a corsage. Let them. And let them go to the pizza parlor. They didn't have reservations for dinner. But Mel Robbins was freaking out about all these things.
Right.
But she said, let them. And then she goes into this part of the podcast where she says, you know, we're all so worried about what we're going to post on social media. Somebody might roll their eyes, or somebody might say something negative, or somebody might think something. And, you know, you have all these drafts in this graveyard of drafts. And the
Yes.
drafts are the graveyard of the things we're afraid to post
Oh.
because people are going to think things and say things. And do you know what she said? Let them.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
There's
ordered the
only-
book.
yeah,
I
yeah,
ordered
yeah.
that book.
When you care,
Yes.
you give your power away.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Unless it's physically dangerous or morally harmful,
Yeah.
let them.
Let them.
Yeah, I love it. I ordered that book, and I also was going to say that also goes hand in hand with fear, right? I can't
Yeah.
remember. There's something the Dalai Lama said on fear. There's a quote about fear, about something about fear. The only thing you have to be afraid of is fear itself, or something like that. And
Yeah,
that
well,
that's
Alfred Adler would say that fear is a mistaken thought that you can't handle something.
Mm,
Or you,
Yeah.
you never have anything to fear but fear itself.
Yes.
that's it. Yeah.
I'm scared of
Yeah.
shit.
And
Yeah.
so that's the thing. So going along with what you guys were saying, like, let them, it's like, but do it without fear.
I have 3 rules about fear.
Okay,
Rule number 1 is walk towards your fear.
Okay.
Rule number 2, be as present as possible as you move towards your fear. And rule number 3 is see rule 1 and 2.
so walk towards your fear and be as
And be as
present.
present as
As
possible.
Move towards it. And rule number 3 is to see rule 1 and 2.
Okay.
I like that.
Mary, going back to Houston, I wanted to, you know, again,
Yeah.
thank you for having us on your podcast
Yeah.
and for me to be able to open up somewhat about Houston. We could talk for hours, and I know you and I
Yeah.
over the phone. The message I think for me that I would like to get out there is that this can happen to anybody
At any time.
at any time, and we were blindsided.
Yeah.
And Houston is traveled on ahead, and
Yeah.
he's gone, but
But not in your heart.
not in my heart, but it's not the same.
No,
You know,
no.
people can
Not the same.
say
Yes.
he's with you, and I hear it every day, and Houston's still with you, and I so love and appreciate people's warm and their good hearts, and people don't really know what to say, because
No.
what do you say?
All you can do is hold the space so the person can share their pain,
Yeah.
their grief.
And I love it, and
Yeah.
I love the expression hold space, and I recently just posted something and I said, I thank all of the people who continue to hold space for me, because there's been so many people out there who have been so beautiful, and you know, sometimes we
Yeah.
all get disappointed in the human race, and people can be so selfish and only think about themselves, and everybody, it's like a dog eat dog world, and everybody's trying to be better than the next person, and then something like this happens, and it's absolutely amazing, the support and love and how people come together. And there have been so many people who have walked this journey and continue to walk this journey with me and have held space and held me up. And Mary, you're one of those people, and Jim, you're one of those people. It's been unbelievable, the support that our family have received. Really, the problem is that we didn't have the warning signs. And
No,
so,
and the problem is too, is that Houston was, if you knew him, was so lovable. He was
Oh,
full
I
of
knew him
life.
since he was 3 years old, Jim, and I
He's
got to
so
tell you,
lovable, and so it's such a shock because of that.
you know, and all of the different religions and places in the world, all of the human beings and the wars and the famine, and you know, you look at the human race and we're not all that different. We want
Yeah.
to be loved. We want to, you know, be around the people that we love. We want to have a happy, peaceful, beautiful life, and we want to have
Yeah.
good health.
You know,
He was when Houston was a very sensitive human
Oh,
being, and when
he
he
took
loved
things-
hard.
Yeah,
he
right.
was an artist, as
Yeah,
artists
he's an
are,
artist.
right?
Yes.
Yeah, and I tried to explain to Houston that you know, more to me, as important as love, and has a much longer shelf life. Is that the most important thing is respect, because respect leads to trust, and
True.
trust leads to intimacy, and intimacy leads to the only gift we really have for each other, any of us, and that's the gift of vulnerability. And that's the
Oh,
only.
that's so beautifully said.
And it was actually a 9th century fellow called Nicholas Acuso, who was a Roman Catholic. and I'm not Catholic, but he said that and it really stuck with me. The only gift we have for each other is the gift of vulnerability, and that really sits with me.
And it's so hard to
It,
be vulnerable.
it takes
So
courage.
hard.
In our naivety, we can say, this person will love me forever, I'll love them forever, and then they break our hearts. And then we either shut down or we find the courage to move from that naivety of that to what I call innocence, which is I'm going to trust and love knowing I can be hurt.
Jim, what's your schedule like? Because I think I need a couple sessions.
You should.
Yeah, well,
Honestly,
sure.
Very.
Mary,
cool.
yeah, just give me a call and,
Yeah.
and you can get a hold of me through.
That's my thing. I put walls up because I've been hurt so much. So it's hard for me to break them down,
Yes,
like in relationships. So it's
I
like,
understand.
yeah.
You
Ronnie,
know-
one more thing, because I know that you guys are tight on time. Do you want to tell everybody about the Houston Foundation, the Houston
Foundation, yeah, I
Stevenson
think
Foundation?
Yeah.
Sure. Okay. I need to actually correct everybody. Right now, we don't have a foundation. We have the
Oh.
Houston Stevenson Legacy page.
Oh.
Our company, Hillcore, are going to be heavily investing in giving funds in Houston's name to various organizations, predominantly mental health, alcohol related, suicide, stuff like that. So Hillcore will be teaming up with the Houston Stevenson Legacy. And the reason I haven't done a foundation is because it is a huge undertaking.
Yeah.
It's a
Massive,
big
yeah.
thing.
Yes.
So right now, I remember just talking about that really quick.
Yeah.
Something. Are you there, Mary? Hello?
We lost you.
Well, the power went out.
No way.
Yes.
Your
But
power.
You know what? I think we're good. I think we're good because I can end it. I think
That's
we're good.
hilarious.
My power just completely went out.
Oh my God. I honestly wanted to tell you, reach out to Jim and talk to Jim because he's
I will.
helped
I will.
our entire family. And just in closing,
so,
this can happen to
It's
anybody.
so nice to meet you, Jim.